It's been 42 years since the Mary Lee Orsini saga formally ended with her conviction for the murder of her husband, Ron, on October 7th, 1983. But it didn't really end there. Even though Mary Lee was locked away for good, the people whose lives she affected with her crimes were left to live with the consequences. After the narrative end of the Orsini tapes, we still have some stories to share, this being an interview with Robyn and Chuck McArthur. For 43 years, the children of Bill and Alice McArthur have not talked about the implications of the Orsini saga on their family. We now present a 2-hour conversation I had with the siblings shortly after the Orsini tapes debuted in March. We talk about how their mother's death impacted their family and why they haven't talked about it publicly for 43 years. So did you guys get a chance to listen to the first episode of the podcast?
I did.
I did. Yeah.
What do you guys think?
It's good. Yeah. I've always felt bad, for Tiffany and that family. We actually went to school with some of the Orsinis, and not like immediate, but Chuck, you can speak to it. You actually, I think, were in one of the Orsini's grades. Just the whole thing was pretty sad, not looking back on it.
And another one of the Orsinis married one of my wife's childhood friends. And there's another set of Orsinis, the ones that used to be associated with CDI contractors that we used to house sit for them, which is always kind of weird. But yeah, no, for whatever reason, we ended up kind of having an unintentional connection with this family, even beyond the bad stuff.
One thing that's been since we posted the first episode, and I've been putting the links out on Facebook groups like Little Rock History and all that, and people in the comments going, "Oh yeah, I knew Ron, or my dad worked with Ron's dad," and all these stuff. It's like, wow, this is.
I'm sure Little Rock has grown, but I know that when we were growing up, it was 2 degrees of separation for everybody. It was pretty. Everybody knew at least through somebody. You know what I mean? It was a pretty small town.
Little Rock was a city by definition, but it was actually just a big ass town. It's not. I don't know if it was a city back then.
So I guess to start to share kind of like why over the last 43 years or so you guys haven't done a on the record interview talking about your family and what they were involved in. Well, what's kept you from doing it?
Because I like I said to you on our call, I'm now about 13, 14 years older than my mother when she was killed. I've already been through this enough. I don't live in Arkansas. I grew up with this horse shit, and I would go out to lunch with my dad, and people would come up and ask us to sign books. That's not the life I wanted. And Dad and I got in an argument about it one time. I was like, this is nonsense. You need to get out of this town. He never would listen to anybody but himself. So I got out. I couldn't, it was too much. And, I hated moving away from my family, but it just, for my own mental well-being and, my future, I needed to go. And I'm doing it because from what I can tell and the way Chuck rolled it out to me, is that it like he just said, it seems like it's allowing the story to tell itself. I haven't gotten any whiff of like what he was saying. It's like, oh, well, putting people's spin on it. I don't want that. That angers me. I knew that you'd been in touch with Gene Lyons, who I respect. That would be why I have not been friendly with others who have approached me. And I was a little prickly at first, but Chuck and I did discuss it, and I'm doing this with just a little bit of trepidation, but I am doing it.
Caution. Yeah. I'm similar. The way I look at it is that by the time I got old enough to be willing, no one's going to interview an 8-year-old, you know what I mean? And, as me and you told, by the time I was 15 years old, 2 books and a made-for-TV movie had already come out, and they were all just an absolute steaming pile of shit, all of them. So I got to the point where I was like, well, I don't want to hitch my horse to any of these wagons. These are all, I mean, I think I kind of told you about this last episode of Snapped. My uncle participated, which one pissed me off, but two, he was getting stuff wrong.
Mhm.
I was like, so if you don't
Well,
actually
that's
know
another thing though. How many years is it's like it's 40 some odd years, it's like I don't want to remember something. I don't want anybody else to either,
Right.
if I know it's a fact, I'll speak to it. If I'm not sure, I'm gonna say I don't remember, and I think I said this to you. I was like, I've probably forgotten more than I remember at this point, too much water under that bridge. So I'll do everything I can, give you any kind of insights I have. Not interested in parsing out my parents' souls or anything like that, but I will speak to, things that I saw and stuff like that.
Just for a few days ago, I actually got to interview Ron Orsini's niece, his sister's daughter. She was 8 at the time, that her uncle died. And so
she would have been Chuck's age.
Yeah. So we were talking, and I think she read what I was web, but it was a long time ago. But over the course of this interview, she's like her parents really protected her from all this stuff that was happening. Like she was aware of the day they found out about Ron's death. But really, like, she didn't know until years later that Mary Lee was behind your mom's death. She didn't know that until years later. And so I'm telling her stuff that she's maybe forgotten, but stuff she had no idea her family was going through. Like,
I can see that.
Well, I mean, me and you've had discussions. I mean, a lot of my experience when that happened was through the emotional maturity and the access of what information I was offered as an 8-year-old. Robyn was much better at tuning in and paying attention and realizing that something was serious enough to give it a little. I mean, like I said, I was 8. I was concerned with baseball practice and riding my bike to my buddy's house, and everything was going on around me, and it was like I knew something had happened. I knew something was bad, but I wasn't tuning in to the some of the stuff that Robyn's probably privy to. And because of that, a lot of the information that I got as I grew old enough to get it, I got secondhand, and a lot of it was wrong. Like, I thought for years. Well, I mean, up until me and you started talking, and me and Robyn talked about this last week, I thought the way I understood it was she had actually been convicted and hired my dad to be her appellate attorney for the murder of Ron. And that's the story I knew, which was wrong. It was inaccurate, So that's one of the reasons I'm glad I haven't participated in any of the previous attempts, because there's I like the fact that me and my sister are doing this together, because it'll help us parse through the information that we have in our heads, because it may not all be as accurate as we've I mean, I've been carrying that around for 40 years. Thought I had it right. That's pretty wild to find out you're misinformed about stuff like that.
well, one thing I told Kelly Orsini, it's sort of like, if this whole project can help family members better understand what they went through, then that's a success for me. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, Chuck and I went through it, but that family did too, and I would imagine that it's heartbreaking for them, because they, I mean, at least, this is it's small comfort, that Mary Lee went to jail and all that, but they did not get that satisfaction. They did not get that conviction that they should have had.
Well, they got it, and then it got overturned. So,
right. Yeah. And I can imagine that probably doesn't help with coming to peace with it. So,
so I guess start off. What are your earliest? I know we talked a lot last week, Chuck, but for you two, so what are your earliest memories of your parents? especially in this late 70s time period?
Okay, not the day I was born.
No, not
no. Around that time, like when all this was going on, one memory that was really vivid is when Bob Robbins was beat up. I remember that was probably in my little tween brain, that was terrifying because I liked Mr. Robbins. I thought he was a real sweet man, and we were taken up to the hospital, and he looked rough, and I remember that really, like, what the hell is going on? It was, yeah, I remember that. Chuck, do you remember that? Did they bring you to that? I can't remember.
I was left in the car. They didn't want me to see him all tore up. I remember back then you could just leave a kid in the car running with
Yeah. And again, it's like I remember seeing and talking to him, but I don't know if it was that night, but I remember when it happened and my dad telling me what happened.
Yeah.
And because that was kind of a blur,
I do remember seeing him later.
I
think it had to have been later because I remember him having stitches in his face.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm almost positive it was later.
Terrible.
It was pretty bad. But when you're saying what the earliest memories, are you just saying earliest memories that have anything to do with this story, or just our earliest memories?
No, you're the latter. I was like, what are your just general earliest memories of your parents and growing up in like the late 70s? That's what I meant. I'm sorry. So
we moved to Pleasant Valley when I was 3, and I don't remember that. I don't remember the first house we lived in. I do remember.
We used to live in Walton Heights. Where, up, where the water tower and all that. I don't know if that water tower is still there, but it's, the fire station down off Cantrell, you go up. Yeah. And that's where I lived when I was born, when I was born. And Chuck came along, and I guess we kind of started to outgrow that house a little bit. I think my dad's practice was doing better. I remember packing up and moving to Inverness, and having getting my room together and all that. I was listening to that audio file you sent my dad talking about my mom. Sure, our priorities were, keeping us in line and playing tennis. That was it. Those are her top priorities. And they always were, as far as I knew her. She loved her friends. I remember her being really tight with them. She laughed.
Judy, the cruise director, like if they were going to go do anything,
she was
one coordinating the whole thing.
She was she liked to play jokes on people. She liked to tease people. But if she wasn't teasing you or playing jokes on you, she probably didn't care about you. So it was, it was probably, I think her friends understood it was coming from a place of love. She had met my best friend's mother, and they were very close. When I was in preschool, I had gotten in trouble, and surprise. And I was afraid my mother was going to be mad. And so I was sitting out in front of the preschool, and Sarah, we called her Sassy then, she came out and was sitting with me and patted me on the back saying, "You're not going to get in trouble. They're not going to hurt you. You're fine." And I was like, "I'm going to be in so much trouble." And both of our parents walked up, or both of our moms, and they started becoming good friends. And that was Judy Harris. You probably have read about her in the books and stuff. She lived in the same neighborhood. Yeah. And so, there was that, going down to Louisiana, for Christmas, typically. And, we would spend Thanksgiving with my dad's parents. You hear all these ridiculous memes and stuff about kids drinking from water hoses and stuff, but it's really not far from reality. You grow up, when you get old enough to be, on 2 feet, you're allowed to go out and do what you were doing outside. That with not a ton of supervision. If you could ride a bike with 2 tires, you go and do what you wanted. But we have pretty strict rules. They ran a pretty tight ship in our house. Academics were important. My mom was tough on that. She was talking about something she valued. She valued smarts, and she would tell you that. Don't say ain't in front of her. I tested those waters. It did not go well for me. She was an English teacher. And so, yeah, she was like, I'm not raising rednecks, so let's not use that word. I was like, okay. And she actually worked pretty hard. She spoke with a very little accent, as my memory serves, because she wanted to come off as someone who was, I don't know. She did not want to be judged by her accent. She wanted to be judged by what she said. And she was very bright.
She was both proud of being Cajun, but also wanted to be considered above it at the same time. Like she had a license plate on her car that said Cajun.
Yeah, I don't think she wanted to be hemmed in anywhere. You know what I mean? It was like I think she was super proud of being Cajun, and she would slip into that accent that fast, and drop some French on you or whatever. But when she just her normal speech pattern, she kept it pretty neutral,
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit, Daniel. One of the things I remember about her that I always thought was so interesting, and when I was a kid, it didn't really dawn on me how unique it was. But as I got older, I realized how unique it was that there was part of her that very much wanted to come off as a debutante, a woman of culture. She always looked good. She always smelled good. She'd always looked like she was on her way to Wimbledon and blah, blah, blah. But all of her friends were driving like Cadillacs and Lincoln Continentals, and she drove a 64 Mustang up until she got a 442 Cutlass Supreme. She was not, it was that kind of thing where there was still a little bit of that rowdy ass Cajun in her, but she just had to cage it in. She had to do her best to cage it in. But like when it came to how she liked to cut loose when she was in the comfort of her own backyard and was having a good time with her friends, or if we were at the lake and she was with the comfort of her own friends, the real Alice would come out. Or if she was, shopping for a car, the real Alice would come out. I
think my dad he was so very correct when he was trying to talk about her. I was listening to that testimony, and it was hard for me listening because I could hear, I know my dad well, and I know he was trying really hard to kind of control his voice, and I could tell that it was bothering him, and so it almost sounded cold, because when he and I would have conversations about it was very different. But I could tell he was trying to he didn't want to cry, he didn't want to seem emotional.
Well, it was. I find it interesting because he took when Brown asked him that, he takes 30 seconds before he even starts talking.
Yeah, he needed to collect himself, and I knew that's what he was doing. And he did not waste words, my father. And that was his job, though, right? Words were his job. And so, but he was correct in who she portrayed herself to be, and who she was very good at portraying who she wanted everybody to see. But if you got to know her, she was very tender. She loved to write poetry. She loved music and calligraphy. She had an immensely soft side that she shared in pieces with people. I feel like, she trusted you. You got to see that, I think superficially, I don't think people would get to see that as much, but I think her close friends and those who loved her got to see that.
And one of the things that just popped in my head a minute ago, because I remember in that thing, he was talking about how both he and my mother were disciplinarians, which was very true, but they were very different disciplinarians. My mother, being a Cajun and a Catholic, she was more the kind of person to hit you with something. And the kind of I think I've told you the joke about the stories about how we go on a vacation, and she'd pull into Stuckey's and buy a rebel flag on a stick, tear the rebel flag off and throw it in the trash and threaten us with the stick. And that was her way of getting control of us at the beginning of a vacation, so that we weren't little turds the whole time.
Yeah, I would really prefer our mother not be portrayed as like a child beater, because it was
100%. No, and that's not what I'm getting, because honestly,
you phrased it as psychological warfare last week. I'm going to go
100%, because the physical part was very rarely the deal.
Yeah.
You know, like she would she would threaten us with it. I mean, I know I got my fair share of whippings, but I'm not putting that on my mom. I was a punk kid. I got my ass whooped when I deserved to get my ass whooped. That's not what I meant. But her purchasing the stick and letting us know it was there was done. That was a psychological thing to get her kids, is that kind of thing where she didn't want to spank her kids.
Yeah.
So if she could avoid spanking her kids by getting her kids to act right by being scared of her. I always used to joke that whenever I was a kid and I saw my parents, I got excited and I was happy and I'd run up to them and hug them. But if I had gotten in trouble at school and I knew that they knew, I feared them showing up like the hand of God, particularly my mom, because again, she would always, another psychological thing, she'd give you a good spanking, and then she'd tell you you think that was bad, wait till your dad gets home. So then you have to
Yeah.
sit there and wait for dad to get home. Well, in all reality, she was the tennis player. She gave way worse spankings than he did. So, and dad would always
Yeah.
kind of like, you know,
He was a reluctant disciplinarian.
yeah. Well, he's just different. I remember after my mom passed away, he was still a disciplinarian, but he handled things like I remember one time I did something and he handled it like it was like a court of law. It was like, this is what you're in trouble for. What do you have to say for yourself? And he'd let you defend yourself. And if you did a good job, he'd be like, all right, I understand what you're saying. He goes, you still, and then he points out the fallacy of what you did. And he's like, I was going to ground you for 2 weeks. Now you're only grounded for one. Good job defending yourself. But there's no more ass busting. It was a matter of, I'm going to take freedom away from you, or I'm going to take your Nintendo away, or something like that. The physical spankings. I think I maybe got one or two physical spankings after my mom passed away, but he didn't. That's not the way he was. He was more of a, like literally like a court of law. This is what you're in trouble for. Defend yourself. And then
I will say Chuck got way more than I ever did.
yeah,
I was a way
a
more
handful.
sneaky.
I was worse. I will say that. Or I was less sneaky. Robyn was better at getting away with shit than
I was very sneaky. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm probably going to go with Robyn McArthur was a great, loving mother, but she wasn't above psychological warfare.
Yeah.
No, she was not. She would definitely. I mean, it was smart. I mean, it's funny. My kids, I've got two boys, 21 and almost 17, and I have spanked each of them once in their entire lives. But I remember there was one time we were at US Pizza and they were acting rowdy. I didn't just say, if you do that again, I'm going to give you a spanking. My mom came out of me. I said, if you do that again, I'm going to give you a spanking in front of God and everybody. So what I used was embarrassment along with the threat of a spanking. The embarrassment was more of the threat than the actual spanking, and it got their attention like that. And as soon as that worked, it was like a little nod to mom. I was like, yeah, thanks, mom, for teaching me that trick. Because that was the way mom was. If we embarrassed dad in public, he'd do this weird thing where he'd stick his tongue in his cheek, and he'd either grab you, like he'd grab the back of your arm, or he'd grab your ear and just give it a little bit, enough of a pinch to get your attention and be like, just kind of give you that, cut it out, you're embarrassing me. Mom would make a spectacle of it. She'd beat your ass in the middle of Bennigan's. She didn't care.
So Robyn, what was your favorite thing to do with each of your parents? What was your favorite thing to do with your mom and your favorite thing to do with your dad?
I liked she used to drag me everywhere. Like she called me her clone, and because we do favor a lot. But she would take me out everywhere. And I just always liked that. She would, find out what kind of music I liked and put it on, or, it was nice just to have that time. And with my dad, it was the same, just quality time going out. I liked going fishing with my dad, things like that. Just, getting to know them was nice. And they both were really good about making time for us. It's, even with my dad working as much as he was always pretty present. I don't, it was pretty impressive looking back on it with adult eyes, how much he made time.
What I would say is that with my mom, I think one of the things I enjoyed with my mom, similar to Robyn, was one, she loved water. I loved being at the lake with her. I loved being at the ocean with her. She was a lot of fun there. She kind of came alive. You saw kind of a livelier side of her when she was around water. But I also, because she was such a social butterfly, she opened up like most kids, when you're 6 years old, you're friends with the kids you go to preschool with, or maybe your next door neighbor, that kind of thing. Well, mom was such a social butterfly. I had friends that were, um, I had friends from the next neighborhood over because she was friends with Ellen Cotton. I became friends with Jackie Cotton, or I became friends with Scott Harris, which is Sassy's little brother, because of how her hanging out with with Judy, Judy Harris, or I, was friends with the Fowler brothers because she was friends with Beth, and so it's like my circle of friends became larger because mom drug us along with her. Now that wasn't always the best thing. Sometimes she'd go hang out with her. She had a friend named Susie Shalarith that ran this little boutique called the Birdcage, and it was just atrociously boring to a child. So she would go there and hang out and talk to her for 2 hours and then get annoyed that her 10-year-old daughter and 7-year-old son were getting bored and playing in the clothes racks because we're just trying to entertain ourselves. So yeah, there was some time when hanging out with her could get super duper boring, but most of the time it was a lot of fun. As far as my dad, the one thing that I think is different with me and my dad than Robyn is that I played a lot of sports. My dad was real plugged into that. So I got to see my dad. One, we had a lot of one-on-one time because of baseball, because of football, because of basketball, that kind of thing. But I also got to see him in a coaching construct. I got to see him not just be a father, like I had seen him be an attorney, but I was too young as a kid to really appreciate how ridiculously good he was at it. But I did get to see him show leadership on a baseball field or on a football field, and that was cool to me. I think that was one of the things that me and my father bonded specifically over with sports, because then he would, we'd throw the ball around the backyard. That kind of, I don't want to sound like a, you know, Norman Rockwell painting, but I mean, that was the kind of shit he liked to do. It was like, especially if it was one of those, it was like usually I was out with my friends, but if I wasn't and I was just farting around, listening to music or whatever, he'd come by and just throw my glove at me. Let's go. All right. So, it was his idea. He'd want to go outside and throw the ball around. And then he'd show me, he's like, if you close the garage door, you can throw the ball off the garage door, and you can teach yourself to get better at catching grounders and line drives by bouncing it off the garage door. It was that kind of thing. He was just like, he. I don't think he was trying to live vicariously through my sporting life, but he was very plugged into it, and he wanted to see me. He wanted to see me, if I was enjoying it, he wanted to see me be good at it also.
Okay. So
My dad would take me to court.
Okay.
I went to court a few times. Like I said, I was too young to really appreciate it. You being a little older than me, I'm sure you probably got to see how good he was.
I think he wanted me to go into law, and I was like, hard pass. Yeah, that's not. I have watched all this play out. I am good. I'm going to find something completely separate. But thanks.
Do you have any memories of watching him in court?
Oh yeah, yeah. I remember some of his clients too. They were. Um, he was good. I mean, he was. He did some funny stuff in court. He would just turn it on. He he was so good with words, and he would just, you could tell he was just watching everything. Like nothing got by him. When he was in his prime, he was something to watch. He pulled, I think it was Jack Lasseter that told me about this, but I can't remember now, but he pulled some stuff that now you see in sitcoms, right? It's like, it was, I don't want to name the client, but it was some twins, right? And so my dad had what looked like the defendant in the chair next to him. And he asked the person on the stand, do you see the person in the courtroom? And he's like, yeah, it's them right there. And he goes, are you sure? And he's like, yeah. He goes, are you sure it's not that person back there? And they had the person stand up, and they look exactly alike. And of course, the judge lost his mind and was like, and it was like
the Brady Bunch. What are you doing?
some loony I mean, it was, I don't know if he got held in contempt for that, but I think he probably walked that line with it. But it was very effective.
Wasn't above a stunt.
What's that?
Wasn't above doing a stunt.
Oh no, no. If he thought it would work in his to his advantage, I don't think that was his MO. But he was very. He knew how to get in there and break things apart and put them back together. It was fun to watch.
So I already talked to both of you about the kind of music your mom like. So what kind of, I know, well, he got into a honky tonk. So what kind of music did Bill like?
Man, that guy, he liked older country. But man, he listened to the Eagles so much I can't listen to him now. Like I can't
Yeah.
freaking listen to the Eagles. Like they come on, I'm like, nope, and I turn it off. And it's
Yeah.
not because I don't like them. It was always playing, and he loved the Eagles. Like just always played them.
He also he went through a pretty insufferable Dan Fogelberg phase too. I
He
remember.
did, yeah. He liked
Lord
Dan.
Dan
That was,
Fogelberg.
yeah. He did like him, but he also liked Patsy Cline. He liked some Patsy Cline. Like I said, older country. Oh, I can see the woman's face. He appreciated anybody that came through the club. He appreciated. I remember he was.
Loretta Lynn. He liked Loretta Lynn when
Mhm.
the movie Coal Miner's Daughter came out. He got excited about that movie.
Yeah. Dad came from really humble beginnings, and I think he identified with a lot of those older country songs. He felt like he came from that. He rode in rodeos and did all this stuff. He was a Renaissance man, that guy. But yeah, I don't think anybody ever came through the club that he didn't appreciate musically. I remember he got to hang out with. So my dad would drag me to BJ's every freaking weekend.
A lot.
Every freaking weekend I was there, and it was one weekend. He goes, "You're staying with your grandparents," and that was the one time I wanted to go, and it was Ray Charles. I was like, "Dad, you're not going to let me go to meet Ray Charles?" No. I'm like, the one person that you've had that I want to go. No, I can't deal with him and you at the same time. I'm like, you don't deal with me. You put me in a room. Let me go. Let me go. Let me go. He was like, absolutely not. And I'll never forgive him for that. But he did make it up. I did get to go meet BB King, so that was nice. He redeemed himself on that. But I still harbor some anger about the Ray Charles, But apparently,
Charles performing at a honky tonk.
oh yeah.
Well, it was
Well, they had all
not
kinds of-
just it was it was a honky tonk, but I mean, I went and saw Botman Turner Overdrive taking care of business at BJ's.
Yeah.
It wasn't just my dad was not he wasn't going to pigeonhole himself. He had some.
Yeah.
I think that of those, the one I remember the most is because I was in love with her. There was an act. Her name was Sylvia, and she had a song, "Nobody." You feel free to look it up. It's fantastic. But she was a cute brunette with green eyes. I married a cute brunette with green eyes, so she was. I identified my type very early. But I remember getting to meet her. And I was like 6 or 7, but I was just, oh my gosh, she's beautiful. Yeah.
So Robyn, so 1981, the Ron Orsini murders in March. Did you remember maybe overhearing your parents talking about someone named Mary Lee?
Not about Ron Orsini, no. That
No.
it was sometimes it would be on the radar that maybe my dad was in the paper, or something like that. You might see a picture. You hate to say it sounds like old hat, but I mean it does. Like, oh yeah, there's dad in the paper. Um, so Ron Orsini wasn't really on my radar. And because it really didn't have anything to do with me, and it just didn't. So maybe when he represented her, I know that there were some pictures with her and things with him in it and stuff.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, like I said, it was like my mom or my grandmother maybe said, "Did you see your dad in the paper?" Kind of, that could have happened, but it wasn't like a topic of conversation or anything.
Okay, so you were just completely unaware.
Yeah,
of
at that
your
point,
dad was
yeah,
getting
yeah,
involved
there was
in
no
that.
reason for me to be looking in on that. So.
Okay, all right. So I mean, I guess we should go into May 21st of '82 is when this starts coming home.
Yeah.
So what do you guys remember about that day and finding out about what the car bomb?
I'll go first because I bet Robyn has more detail.
Okay.
I remember going to school like a normal day, but instead of getting on the school bus and going home, we didn't know anything during the course of the day. All I knew is that I was told I wasn't riding the bus. My grandparents had come to pick us up. We went back to grandma and granddad's house, and I was told that there was some sort of a malfunction with my mom's car, and it burned my mom a little bit, but she was going to be fine. And then a few hours later, about the time the sun's coming down, they came to pick us up, and I remember her dressed like she was on her way to Wimbledon, except for she had her knee wrapped in gauze, and that's all I really remember because I was not privy to why she got burned or how she got burned.
Okay.
I knew something else was going on. He is correct. They did pick us up from the school. It was a little early, and we went back to their house where we waited, and I didn't have a good feeling. And my grandparents were usually very forthcoming about things. They were being super cagey, and which was making me uncomfortable. I could tell my mom was really upset when they finally did show up, and I could tell she was scared, which was not normal. My mom did, if she was ever scared of something, she did not let on. And I could tell whatever it was really had shook her. And, there were a lot of hushed tones and conversations going on. And, they were just trying to get us to sit at the TV and things like that. But the mood was very
Serious.
tense, heavy. It was very heavy. And I did eventually was told the truth. I think because they knew they were going to have to with me, and I was told. I cannot remember. I was trying to think on this the other day because I didn't want to get it wrong as to who did let me know. It may have been my mom, and but I think the big thing at that point was like, well, who's doing this? Like why? And I do remember not too long after that, my mom was like, "Peace out. I'm going on vacation with my friends." When I was even at that age, I was kind of like, I wonder if this has to do with that, And yeah, that is my recollection of that. They did not get into any kind of adult conversations with me about it, but they did. I think for the age I was at, I felt like they were probably giving me the best information they could.
So what was before you guys got shipped off to camp for 2 weeks? What
Yeah.
was Bill's demeanor? Did it change at all in that window?
Our parents, they did a really good job to kind of keep things normal, and just put us at ease. And I do remember having a little bit of heartburn about going after this so soon, but they were both like, "Oh, you'll have fun, you be with your friends," and I think looking at back as an adult, they were probably like, "Get these kids out of here in case this is some psycho, who knows what was going on in their brains." I would ship my kids off too, get them the hell away from the area until we figure out what's going on. So yeah, I do remember being a little uneasy, not scared, but uneasy. Like I was unsettled. I don't know how to, just a lot of weird things going on. And I don't know. I will tell you that when they came to pick us up, I knew she was dead. And I knew my uncle and my grandfather came and picked us up, and I could tell by their demeanor.
Well, I guess before that, do you remember your parents dropping you off the last time you saw your mom?
I don't necessarily remember being dropped off. The part I remember is, again, we had a very different experience, probably because of information we had been given and just emotional maturity. I was only 8. I wouldn't, I wasn't in the same. I wasn't in the same emotional place that Robyn was. So again, I knew nothing about a car bomb. I just thought my mom had got injured because her car, caught on. I think I told you, I remember they gave my mom a loaner and she thought that the Buick Regal was a piece of shit. And I remember her bitching about the loaner they gave her was not to her satisfaction because it did not have near the engine that her car had.
It's funny. The
I
things that you
remember,
remember, Chuck, are so funny. Like the
I mean,
car.
I remember that rental car. I remember going, this thing's kind of sharp. And mom being like, sharp piece of shit,
It's
you
funny. I do
know?
remember her not being pleased with it, but that's not like a core memory. It's funny that
For
you said
whatever,
that. I was like, oh yeah, she did.
for whatever reason, that sticks in my brain. But what I remember is I remember that the previous year, Robyn had gone to camp and had had a good time. So I was excited about camp. I wasn't aware of this impending danger. I was just like, school had ended. I had gotten into my normal routine of riding my bike with my buddies and either swimming at my house, swimming at Scott's house, swimming at the country club, whatever. We were just always the shucking and jiving of the normal summer. And then that got interrupted by me getting to go to camp, the same camp that Robyn went to last year. I was a little spooked because it was my first time to be somewhere that long. I remember my mom having to iron these little name tags into all my clothes. And I remember being able to help pick out the trunk because we had to we had so much stuff we took with us. We got a trunk. And I remember getting to go trunk shopping. And I thought that was cool. But the actual loading up and going to camp, I don't remember much of.
Okay.
Yeah, because I had already been for a year or two before that, so that type of memory. I didn't commit that. It just kind of like, yeah, you get dropped off, you get checked in, you go to your cabin, kind of thing.
And so just by looking at your grandfather and Jim, you just knew.
Mhm. Yeah, I think I had been concerned, but it's 12, how do you process that at that age, or 11, or however old I was. But I'm still pretty good at reading people, uh, which is not always fun, but yeah, I could tell, because Chuck, I don't think Chuck had picked up on it. He was just kind of doing his thing and being Chuck, and I could tell usually, but Chuck being Chuck would make adults laugh, right? He was funny and kind of entertaining, and their face. First of all, they're they were the color of my jacket. They're white. They were white. They were just. You could tell they were devastated, and it was a really long drive from Timberlake Camp, or back to, and we went to my uncle and aunt's house, and that's where we were officially told.
I believe so who told you?
My dad, he knelt down and told us, got on our level to talk to us.
So I'll send you this right after we're done with this, but Gene talked to your grandparents about this, and they recalled breaking the news to you. They recalled you guys kind of already crying before you were told, like you were getting bad vibes off of the room.
I could tell something was up. Again, like I've told you.
Well, we walked in, our mother wasn't there, and I knew immediately, because I'd already had the suspicion. I already knew something really bad was going down, and I'd been sitting with it for however, it seemed like 10 days we were in that car, but it may have only been an hour. I honestly, that time, it was weird that from the time they picked me up from camp for until however long this shit lasted. Time was weird. I can't tell time. Was it a day? Was it 10 minutes? It's because everything was it was like a nuclear bomb. And just, we were just doing everything we could to hold things together. And time was just simply not important.
Your grandpa says that once you were told, Robyn, he says you stopped crying, kind of instantly, and then they never saw you shed a tear over this again. Does that seem right to you?
I think I disassociated. And I did cry, just not in front of them.
Yeah.
You know, I had this weird idea that I needed to not cry in front of them because I didn't want to upset them because they were already upset enough.
Yeah.
You know, I did cry at the funeral. Actually, I think I passed out at the funeral. I remember it was really hot. It was a freaking spectacle. We were in the front row, and it was July, so it's just hot as Hades. And we were going through the service, and all of a sudden I just kind of just started losing. I was like, I'm getting dizzy, and I think may have been Judy Harris and my grandma. I can't remember. I kind of blacked out. And I remember kind of being not in the rectory, but whatever in the back where the bathroom is, that kind of thing. But yeah, and then we got in the limos and stuff to go out to the gravesite. Just so many people. Holy crap. And most of them were friends and family, but a lot of looky-loos too, Yeah, it was, like I said, the time, it's weird. It's weird to like try to parse all it together.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been that way. It's not a matter of age at this point, although age is hello, but it's always been that way, because it just was so much coming at us at all times, and it just, yeah.
Yeah. I would say, I mean, you've have discussed this, and I think me and Robyn have too, but I could tell something was up in the car. I could feel a bad vibe, but I was still I didn't know anything for sure. So when left to my own devices, I was usually dicking around, being myself, probably trying to be funny, and and falling on deaf, unbeknownst to me, I had the wrong audience for that kind of tomfoolery. But when I got back to their house and I could see how somber everything was, I could just feel it. And I remember when my dad told me, like you said, everyone else, like I was already starting to tear up just because I could I could feel something was coming. But then when he told me, everyone else was crying, and I was just I remember crying, but I remember it feeling performative. I remember it feeling like, I was 8, I didn't really, the permanence of death hadn't really, was not a concept that I had fully embraced just yet. And I had not had a major member of my family die before that. So I had never been to a funeral. I'd never dealt with death before. And I went to a Catholic school. So the only death I ever dealt with was Jesus, and he came back. So I was like, how permanent can it be? So I remember literally kind of like, well, everyone else is so upset. Clearly, I'm supposed to be crying. So I remember crying, and it felt real. It felt like I knew I felt like I was crying, but I also felt, and I could feel that I needed to cry. Like Robyn's instinct was I don't need to cry. I don't need to make this worse on everyone else. My instinct was, I don't want to look like an insensitive little shit. So I need to cry. If I don't cry, people are like, well, what's up with this kid? This kid just found out his mom died and he didn't cry. So I was worried about looking like, looking like it didn't matter. And it
You also
certainly
need to not be
happens to
so
have
hard on your
emotional.
child self either. It's like everybody processes
Yeah, like I
grief
said, I was
differently.
8.
And it was whether or not we had the bad juju or not, and we felt it before going in, it's still like a horrible loss, and it's still a shock to the system. And, nobody can, predict how anyone's going to react to death, and
But like you said, everyone deals with death a different way. And the first time you deal with death, you don't actually deal with it because you're not emotionally equipped. You just kind of go on about your day because you're 8. Well, what happens is that when a shitty book comes out when you're 15, you lose your mind. That's what happened to me. I didn't truly grieve my mom's death until I was 15 years old, because I was just I didn't really know what was going on. Honestly, and this sounds stupid, but I thrive off of groups. I love being in groups. That's just my personality is I'm a very communal guy. So all of a sudden, I'm not going to say I enjoyed the attention, but it was like, it just seemed like this situation created this never-ending parade of visiting friends and visiting relatives and getting to go live with grandma and granddad, who I loved. I was very close to my grandparents. So it was that kind of thing where people hear how this happened to me when I was a kid, and they're like, "Oh, you poor baby, that must have been horrible." No, it wasn't. I didn't understand the death of my mother part of it, but every other part of it, honestly, I guess I should look back and appreciate how much love we were surrounded by. But the 8-year-old me loved it. I I loved constantly being surrounded by people. I loved hanging out with my grandparents. I mean, yeah, there's parts of it that sucked. Having to sit down on, and watch your dad get arrested on Super Bowl Sunday. That sucked. But other than that, the 8-year-old mind is, I was like, am I going to be able to go to Eight Wheels this weekend? That was the kind of shit I was worried about.
So I know the funeral is like 4 or 5 days after she was killed. Robyn, do you remember the first time the word Orsini gets brought up at any point in all this?
I know that whenever, like I said, time is weird.
Yeah.
I do feel like they communicated with me pretty well. I was quick to snatch up a paper too, so that, but I remember my granddad or grandmother one had left, they were pretty good about trying to snatch up the paper, so I couldn't get too much information, but I usually was able to find it. And they had left it on the table, and I guess they came in, they'd been on the porch, and I was sitting there reading it, and they're like, you don't need to be reading that. I'm like, I think I do. I think I do need to read it. And so they were a little bit more, they're like, okay, if you think you can manage that, if you're okay with it, it's, here you go, that kind of thing. So
as you're going through all that, so you're just like slowly putting the pieces together about what happened. So what was that like? Just like,
well, probably about like anybody
over time, I guess.
Anybody else in Arkansas, you're getting all the sensational bullshit that you're getting. But
I remember Dad telling us, because I remember Dad calling Mary Lee crazy. I remember him using the word crazy. Said he said I represented a woman who is crazy, and that I just remember that part of it.
I do remember, this was a conversation years later. My dad and I were talking, and because I used to have lunch with him almost every day, and because I worked for him, it was easy, so he and I would go grab lunch. And you want to talk about a good memory? He and I watched the OJ trial from beginning to end together, like every day, and we would discuss the ins and outs and this and that and the other and what he would do different, and it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it, actually.
You worked for your dad?
Mm-hmm. I was his process server.
Okay. What does that mean?
I would go serve people.
Okay.
Yeah. I did that. I would also run over and file discovery and do stuff like that. I mean, whatever he needed me to do, I would do it. Sometimes I need to run to another court. Like I'm telling you, he really wanted me to go into law. He was hoping I'd get the bug. I did not, so, and I used to tease him, like when he would get on my nerves, I'm like, keep it up, old man. I'm going to go join the Little Rock Police Department. And he would get so mad at me. He would be like, you will not. And I was like,
try me.
Or maybe the sheriff's department. And he would be like, damn it, Robyn, and like we would just tease each other like that all the time. So
going back into the narrative. So Yankee Hall pleads guilty, gets convicted. Then Mary Lee has like a 3-day trial, gets convicted. Were you in the know for any of that?
I will tell you that we were pretty. So Chuck and I through a lot of this. I don't know if you know this, Chuck, but there were a lot of threats to kidnap us and hurt us and things like that. People are crazy, and so They were constantly moving Chuck and I to different places. So we would spend some time in Hot Springs at different friends' cabins. We would sometimes spend time at a convent. We were moved around quite a bit. And that around that time,
The
yes,
nuns,
we were,
the nuns'
yeah,
levels.
they did.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I actually did get kidnapped once and for an afternoon, and luckily the husband came home and lost his mind. Yeah, it was a little scary.
Wait, okay. What happened?
This woman that she had been sending dad stuff apparently, and I didn't know, and she lived in Pleasant Valley, and I was cutting through to get to my friend's house, and she grabbed me, pulled me in her house, and made me sit there. And she played a bunch of religious music and wouldn't let me leave. And I was scared to death. Like I was like, she was a little cuckoo. And I don't know if Chuck, do you remember getting care packages on the porch from the Agape Church? Do you
Oh,
remember that? That was her. And
You shocked me.
so her husband gets home, and he was like, "What is this child doing in our house?" And she was, talking to him in the other room, and he came out and he goes, "Miss McArthur, I'm going to take you home," because he knew who I was. He was like, "Oh no," he knew the gravity of the situation, and he was like, "Holy crap," So he got me, and he was like, "I'm going to drive you home." So he drove me home. I remember thinking at that time, "Am I really going to get in a car with somebody?" But I was like, "I got to get away from her." So sure. And he seemed okay. And so he drove me right home. He knew exactly, he didn't even have to ask where I lived. He knew exactly where I lived. Everybody in that neighborhood knew where we lived. So he pulled up, and he just stopped. And I'm getting out of the car right as Judy Harris and Anita Prather are driving down the street. Okay. And I look at them right they see the look on my face, like, you know, and they like slam on their brakes, and he takes off, and they pull into our driveway, and they're like, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" I was like, "I'm fine." I was like, "But I've had a wild afternoon." They're like, "Yeah, we were wondering where you were." So I think I was headed to Sarah's house, and it was yeah.
So how long after everything is this? At what point is
Oh, it was in the midst of all of it.
so
Yeah.
that fall, all
And
that?
I think so. Well, it may have been a little after, like I said, time, fluid,
Yeah.
Robin brain. Um, but
Wow.
I was still pretty young. I was like 12,
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
in the timeline, I don't know if it was, but we were living at home. So that tells me that, because for the longest time we lived with my grandparents.
my entire third
So
grade year, almost
yeah,
almost
so it was when we had finally moved back into Inverness,
Okay.
so
it was probably that following summer if you were
yeah.
cutting through people's yards.
hmm
Okay, I meant to ask you that. So when was the first time you two actually went back to the house at any point after?
I don't remember if the school year had ended or not, but I remember all of the major holidays that year were at my grandparents' house. So it had to have been somewhere between February and May
Of 83.
of 83.
Yeah, I remember going back to get some stuff. Um, I remember being concerned, about what would be in there. And my gut is telling me it wasn't too long, but we did not spend a lot of time there. We would occasionally go there. I thought we went there maybe once or twice to swim, maybe because we had a pool in the backyard. But I may be, like I said, don't quote me on that. Like I said, that may have been later, like when we came back, because we didn't just come back overnight. I think we slowly ebbed our way back home.
Well, you got to remember that I think our house remained an active crime scene for the duration of dad's trial, or at least the first part of it.
Yeah, because I know they had to bring the grand jury and all that stuff in there. So.
So what are your memories of your dad during this period?
Do you want to go first, Chuck?
I remember I saw him less. And I knew that. He seemed a little more serious than usual, but he was still very warm. I I think he really appreciated the escape of my sports activities. So I do remember, and at that point, I wasn't playing on a team that he actually coached. I was actually playing for our team my Uncle Bob coached, but he was all up in that shit during that time because I think it gave him an escape. It was an opportunity for him to make sure, I was okay, my headspace was fine, although I wasn't the one he needed to worry about. But I think it gave him an escape of being able, just go play ball in the sun and all that. So I remember, yeah, but I remember my dad having to be um, gone a little more than usual. It wasn't just like, I mean, with his schedule, there were times he'd be done. He'd be home by 3:30 in the afternoon. There's other times he'd be gone until 6. Well, there was no 3:30 afternoons during when he was. He was pretty much he was trying to do his job, and when he wasn't doing that, he was meeting with his attorneys trying to make sure he didn't go to prison. So there was a lot of time away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Robyn?
I remember seeing a sadness in him. I think he was frustrated. I think and I may be speaking out of turn here, but it was just my intuition told me he just couldn't believe that anybody would think that he did it. It just wasn't, if you knew him at all, he was a soft touch. Like he really was. He was a big talker, but he was a softie, and I think it hurt him that he was having to go through this. I think it hurt him that he kind of became a pariah. We were asked to leave the church, things like that.
Really?
And yeah.
Well,
and
yeah, I think we were going to leave the church anyway. We became aware that we were members of Christ the King Church in Pleasant Valley.
Yeah.
And they were in the process of building that school that they have now. Well, we were not members of St. Edward's, but we went to St. Edward's school. So we went to church at one Catholic church, and then we actually attended church at another Catholic church. The Catholic church that we went to school with, not only did they not gossip behind our backs, but they built a little miniature library for in my mother's memory. They allowed me and my sister to come stay with the nuns. They very much put their arms around us. But the other church was a different deal. It was in Pleasant Valley. You had all these nouveau riche, yuppie, gossip hounds. They would sit around during adult Sunday school and discuss openly in Sunday school whether or not they thought my dad was guilty or not.
It was my dad's opinion that they didn't like the publicity or something that we brought to the church. That was what he originally told me. And it wasn't so much we were excommunicated or anything like that, but I just our presence I don't think was necessarily welcome, is how he was left to feel in it.
Wow.
And he told me about it, and I just kind of was like, wow, that's something. It always kind of.
And if we're being honest, our Christian upbringing and our rather fanatical loyalty to the church was very much my mother's initiative.
Mm-hmm.
My dad,
my father was not as spiritual as my mother was, so he kept us in the Catholic school, and we continued to go to church for a short amount of time after that. But once he realized that me and Robyn weren't particularly interested in waking up on Sunday and getting gussied up and going to church, he was like, "Oh, y'all don't want to go? Sweet, let's not go." And we just didn't. I mean, I remember he kind of joked. He was like, I remember my dad using the word churched up. Like he was like, "I think we're churched up. We're good. We don't have to go. We don't have. There's no need to ruin a Sunday for all this. We're churched up."
Yeah, my mom was pretty devout in her Catholicism. My dad was Protestant and that was actually when they had their back and forth. It was usually about religion. And my dad would just that he loved to just get in her skin, and
Needle
it
her.
was really needle her about it. It was, but she was smart about it. She knew her stuff, so she could come back at him. But that was
Explain
something that,
purgatory again,
yeah.
Get her all
But
pissed
yeah,
off.
they loved the tit for tat with each other. It was fun.
So, I guess as the years go by, like Robyn, you said you would talk with your dad about
Mhm.
what he went through. So when did you really feel like you really kind of grasped what your dad had gone through over the course of?
I learned something new every year, just in my aging, when you're younger, it's harder to get that perspective, you know. But as I get older and I think about what he went through, it's like I said, I feel like because I do think on it, I think about my dad and, what he went through, because, Chuck and I went through, it was bad, it was real bad. My dad had it 10 times what
I
we
didn't.
had, he was really had the shit kicked out of him for no good reason whatsoever. And, he was just trying to give somebody a good defense, and he did, and he paid for it, no good deed, I guess.
Can't even compare the two. I just can't even compare. I know how I feel. I know how I feel about my wife. And if I lost her today, I know how it would make me feel. But to then also be blamed for it and to
Mm.
have to
Yeah.
spend 18 months of your life convincing people that you weren't the reason she's dead. And then knowing, even once you won and you're exonerated, to know that 40% of the people around you don't believe it. They all think you're a murderer. And you're just going to walk around without your support system. You don't have the support system you had, and half the people that make eye contact with you think you're a murderer. I can't even wrap my brain around.
Yeah, it broke him, in a lot of ways, and it was sad, It,
I will say this, and we kind of touched on this a little bit, but I definitely wanted to say this in front of Robyn to get her take on it. My father was a very, very driven man, and he had a very an addictive personality. I think his primary objective after we got back in that house, his new addiction was being a parent. I remember him being very, like, a lot more involved, and he seemed almost, this is going to sound weird, but he seemed almost in a hurry to find us a mother figure, which I thought was a
I can see that.
mistake. I thought he allowed some women into his life trying to. I think he did it for me and Robyn, but we had a
Yeah,
certainly probably at least one really bad decision, stepmoms, and part of me, I mean, my dad was a pretty vain guy. Ironically, the one that you would think, if I was gonna describe these three women to you, the one that
Oh,
you
so
would think,
there's three more. Okay.
the first one was 100% after my father's money,
Mm.
and and
yeah, she was a scumbag.
it was really gross. She was a horrible stepmom. It seemed like they went from he was introducing us to her, and they were getting married in a matter of months. It was way, way
Yeah,
too fast.
yeah, I remember that.
Moved the stepdaughter into the house, and the amount of favoritism the stepmom showed was just off the charts. She was trying to convince my dad that me and Robyn wanted to move out of the house because it gave us the EBGBs. And the reason she was doing that is because she wanted my dad to buy a new house with her name on it so that she could then divorce him and take the house.
Mhm.
And that didn't work because me and Robyn stood up to her and was like, we don't want to move out of this house. This is our home. So then she convinced my dad to sell his stake in another lake house that he was part owner of, to sell his stake and build a new lake house, which he built this beautiful lake house. And I think we got to hang out in it 3 times before she filed for divorce and took it from him. She's a horrible, horrible, horrible human being. And that is just another, when I think about it from my dad's perspective, it's easy for me to go, come on, you got to be smarter than that. Can't you, don't you, can't
Well,
you see that? But then I
it
look
was
back
funny.
on it and I'm trying to imagine already having to carry what I just described, that you lose your wife, people think that you're the murderer, and now you finally think you found someone you can trust, and they immediately try to screw you out of half your stuff. It's just like, yeah, I would have,
Well, with that one, I'd actually, when we were at our grandparents' house and he had told me about who he was about to marry, and I was like, have you lost your mind? And here I am, like 13, like, what? Like, no, this is a horrible idea. She's a shrew. Don't do this. She's not, this is not a good idea. And my dad's like, I'm not taking advice from a 13-year-old. And my granddad told him, he was like, you need to shut your mouth and listen to her because she's the only one on this porch that has any sense, you know? And he goes, you need to listen to her. He goes, she just sits here and listens to everything. She knows everything. Just listen to her. She's right. She sees something you're not, and sure enough, I was right. But yeah, she was dangerous. I'm like, Lee, but yeah, I think he was trying to do that. I think he felt like he wasn't able to give us everything we needed, but he was, and I wish he had just talked to us first. We were fine, well, not fine. We were fine as fine as we could be, I suppose, but we certainly didn't need more drama. How about that? No more drama. And right. That's all that lady brought. And so, yeah, I think my dad, I think it broke his heart. I think it did. I think the whole thing in every which way, I think he lost his dreams because he had big sights. Like he was like, I'm going to be on the Supreme Court. He wanted it all. He was very ambitious.
Being an attorney was a stepping stone for him. He wanted to be a federal judge.
Mm-hmm. He wanted to be on like some sort of Supreme Court, anything. He just wanted it. He knew he was smart enough to do it. He knew he had the acumen to do it. He
knew
blew it up.
Yeah, any chance of being an elected official after what he had been through was pretty much out the window. So, but like I said, because he had such an addictive personality, after a couple of ill-chosen family-oriented decisions, he really got focused on his career and became like, it's that kind of thing where if he knew he wasn't going to be a judge, then he was going to be the best damn attorney in the country. And he took on some cases that were sketch as hell and won them. Like I don't know the nuts and bolts of it. Robyn will, because I think at this point she was a little more plugged in. He took a case that had him having to go to Phoenix, Arizona a lot. But it was a sketchy case, but him winning it made him, I mean, it was financially lucrative for him to have won that case. But I remember it being
that was
very tough.
Oh God, what was that guy's name? Even if I remembered his name, I couldn't say it. But he had gotten busted with a plane full of cocaine. And a plane full of cocaine.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, it pretty much seemed like an unwinnable one. And he won it somehow. So it was a federal case. So,
then the late 80s come, early 90s, and then the books start coming out, the TV movies start coming out.
I didn't give Bouquet for Murder much thought. I remember it coming out, and I remember seeing
that came out really fast. That was one of the first ones, yeah.
But I remember looking at it. It looked like a Cliff Notes book. It was the goofiest looking. I was like, no one's going to read that. That looks like a trash novel.
But I mean,
Jan Mines, Murder in Little Rock was the one that pissed me off. Bouquet for Murder didn't bother me.
Okay, but so which book was the one that you had your reaction when you
Murder in Little Rock?
Okay, so yeah, share that.
Well, I mean, Robyn knows she worked at the Hastings. I had my little breakdown in. She just wasn't working that night. But yeah, I was highly hormonal. I was 15 years old. You're at that age where you're starting. You're turning into a man from a kid, and you start thinking about. I think that's probably about the time I started realizing that maybe my childhood wasn't as normal as it felt. And there's a lot of unresolved horseshit in my life that I just haven't gotten my arms around. I was like, I have a good relationship with my dad. Do I have a good relationship with my dad? I have a good relationship with my dad. Do I have a good relationship with my dad? It's that kind of thing. It's like you're a kid and you start playing tricks with yourself, with your own mind. So you find yourself getting pissed off about things that shouldn't piss off, and you find yourself, not caring about things that should piss you off. So you're at that time in your life, a normal 15-year-old, you're at a time in your life when you can be easily set off by silly shit. Well, Dad had warned us about this book coming out, but he said that they had promised it was going to be done tactfully and tastefully, but it was coming out. So if you saw it, don't freak out. And of course, that's my dad warned us that it was coming out. I probably should have known it was going to be bad because of the way he warned us. Well, I walk into, me and my buddies are out on a Friday night, and I walk into Hastings, and there's an end cap of books with my mom's actual wedding photo with blood spattered across it and broken glass and a gun and rose petals. And it was just the tackiest shit I'd ever seen. It was tacky if it wasn't my mom, but it was my mom, her actual wedding photo. It was in it caught me in such a way and was in such low taste. It was in such poor taste, and I was in such a bad headspace. I kind of lost my mind there for a minute. Throwing books around and pushing displays over, and I think if my sister wouldn't have, there was other employees that worked there that were friends with my sister that knew who I was. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was probably either Brad or Sean Stockberger. One of the two was who got me out of there before they called the police. But I was in a bad way. I was in a bad way. All the feelings that I didn't reconcile when I was 8 just came pouring out of me. And it wasn't in a healthy, I'm going to sit here and cry it out. It was in a, what the fuck?
Yeah,
I'm
it was.
absolutely losing my mind. I kind of described it as Ralphie in Christmas Story. Just like, I was like completely, lost time. I was just super pissed off.
How did you find out about this, Robyn?
When I went into work the next day.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're like, should we move this? I'm like, it wouldn't hurt my feelings if you didn't have that in front of my station.
Oh, it was right there. Right. Oh, wow.
It was facing if you were standing at a cash register.
I don't think that the management had put it together, and my friends were too kind to say anything, but I was like,
So had you seen it before Chuck did, or
I saw him put it together. Yeah.
how'd that make?
Yeah.
What
I was like,
were
what am I
you-
going to do? I already knew this shit was coming out. I'd already dealt with it. I had seen I knew everything that was in it. And, that book, it had some stuff in it. I'll just say that I'd already read it and had my own interesting interaction with it. But I sat down with my dad and talked about it, and I'll just leave it at that. I didn't necessarily, I didn't just thought it was more of like it was more, it read like a pulp rag, and I don't know. I felt like it was kind of rushed together, and just some of the stuff that was in it, I don't know. Some of it, because I was still pretty young. There was, I wasn't an adult yet. I think I was probably
17, almost 18.
Yeah.
I was 15. I remember
but that book seemed like I was able to see it before it got released. I can't remember though. It seems like Dad and I had already had a conversation about it.
I know that almost the first conversation I had with Robyn after all that went down was she came home and told me that she knows what happened the night before. And I was worried she was going to tell Dad and I was going to be in trouble. But she kind of told me that she agreed. She goes, I didn't react the same way, but I get it. I get it. She goes, what I need you to understand is that next Saturday they're having a book signing. Jan Mines is going to be there having a book signing, and we're not going to go. I was like, she's going to be there? And she was like, no, we are not. It was like bad dog.
Yeah.
I was a rowdy teenager. I would have been more than happy to have undressed her ass right in the middle of everybody, gone there and, told her what a horrible piece of garbage she had written. But I was not allowed. I was not allowed.
Okay. All right. So that would have been what, 89?
90,
Hey,
91.
88? Yeah,
No,
I wasn't quite out of I graduated high school in 89.
Okay.
I was working in Hastings between 88 and 89.
Okay.
it had to be 89 then, because the reason I remember this is because, well, yeah, like I said, the reason I remember is because if I remember correctly, one of the new Ice Cube CDs had just come out. I can't remember which one, but I think we were going by there to get the new Ice Cube CD, and that was, yeah, yeah.
Oh
You know,
boy. So
that,
when did the TV movie that was 91?
something like that. Oh, that
Yeah.
was horrible. Peter
I haven't watched
Coyote
it. I
and
have no desire to.
oh God, what was her name? Jean Smart was in it, and now I like Jean Smart. I like her a lot. She's actually in a show right
Yeah.
now that's
Yeah,
really good.
she was in
Uh,
Designing Women, wasn't she?
she was, yeah.
Yeah.
But now she's in a show on Netflix. But anyways, um, yeah, that was something. It was ridiculous. It was
I
pretty.
was curious is why change the names? Why move it to Texas? That's what
It was weird. Well, if you'd met the guy that made it, he was a dingus, and imagine a 60-year-old old school movie producer from Hollywood, and just that's kind of a sleazeball. Get that image in your mind, and you're probably right.
okay.
Okay.
So you met him?
Oh, multiple times. I'd be trying to have lunch with my dad, and he'd show up and be like, "Oh, not this asshole again," you know. And I'd be like, "Dad, why? Well, if you don't if you don't talk to them, they're just going to put what they want." I was like, "They're going to put what they want anyways. Why talk to them?" You know.
Yes, as soon as they change the names, they can do whatever they want. Like pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, they probably just didn't want to pay. I don't know, maybe
Oh
your
yeah, my dad, man.
rights or something.
I was like, if you're going to do this shit, at least get paid.
Yeah.
I
It's
think he did get paid, but not what he should have.
no, he did not.
I don't know about
They
the
may have paid him like a consultation fee or something like
yeah.
that. But he did not get rich off of that silly shit.
Oh, I didn't
So
say rich. I said paid. There's a difference.
But then, so 93, What Is Web comes out,
mhm.
which the podcast is largely based on. So when did you guys read that?
I was nervous because I didn't know who Gene Lyons was at the time. I knew he was a reporter. And I was, me, so I was like, I don't know about this, and my dad's like, no, you really ought to talk to him. I really feel like he's trying to do the right thing. I'm like, yeah, I'll say that. And he goes, just sit down with him. We'll come to find out Gene and I were neighbors. We lived a couple of streets away from each other.
Oh, okay.
And I ended up liking him pretty well, and I felt like he was trying to be truthful. He likes to add his color to it, but nothing in the way of pulling away from fact or creating something that's not there. I felt like he approached it more journalistically than anything else that had come along. I mean, Jen Mines was supposed to be a journalist. I'm not sure how. I don't know. Maybe she was. Maybe she needed a better editor. I don't know. But I do feel like Gene did a good job.
I'm not one of those people that reads for fun. So Robyn's the kind these books come out, and she sits down and reads them, and I'm like, hard pass. It's just not my.
How do people not read?
Oh,
How do you not
I
read?
have a master's degree. I've read my ass off. I read all the time because I have to. I don't read for fun.
Oh.
I don't read because I enjoy it. I read because
My
it's
idea
part
of fun is leaving all of my devices at home and bringing about 16 books to the beach and not talking to people for a week.
My idea of fun
That
is leaving all of the books at home and bringing 16 lights to the beach. So, anywho, but no, I was so. I will say I was told by my father, especially since again very similar to this. Don't worry. I know they keep screwing this up, but this guy's going to get it right. That was kind of the way Dad pitched it to me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, Gene wasn't trying to talk to me, but my dad made me feel a lot better about this one, and I did read this one, but I actually think I still have the editor's copy somewhere at my house. I did read this one. I didn't sit down and read it in a day like she probably did because, some of it I'd read it and, I mean, some of it would get under my skin a little bit, some of it I'd read and they'd get off in the weeds about some shit that, that didn't capture my attention. So, but I read it, but I didn't, and I agree. It was well done. He stuck to the facts. He didn't try to create some. I think Jan Mines almost and Bouquet for Murder, they both were written almost like a whodunit. Like this shit played out in court. Why are you writing this book like a whodunit? This is, but then again, like me and you spoke, this younger generation grew up during the OJ trial. So being found innocent doesn't make you innocent of shit, so I mean, I guess if you're trying to sell books, writing a book about a husband who may or may not have had an affair, a husband who may or may not have killed his wife, leaving that a little open-ended on the back end is probably going to help you sell some books. You're going to piss the family off, and you've absolutely bastardized the actual story. But and you got to understand,
I also think
their job is to. This is where the whole journalism versus selling books thing gets gray to me. Yeah, Gene Lyons is I think he's a reporter first and an author second, and that comes out in his writing. Jan Mines was not operating as a journalist; she was operating as a writer.
Yeah, well, if you rush it, which I felt like those were, the earlier ones, and you are going to miss things. And you're gonna and if you've read or if you you're finding out this shit goes in 10 different directions, and it's there's so many different people and players and it's the weirdest. Like, I don't need, you ask me why I don't talk to people about it, because it's crazy. The whole thing is crazy, right?
Oh.
Like, you start trying to explain to people and they're like, what? Well, no, wait a minute. I'm like,
that's why I was so against that's why I was so against the Snapped episode. The Snapped episodes are always about man-woman relationship turns bad, one of them snaps and kills the other one. That's the recipe for all of their episodes. And I'm looking at this story going, well, this story doesn't fit the narrative because there is no man-woman relationship where one of them snaps. There was no relationship there. This was a married couple broken up by a crazy woman that wanted to replace one of the people in there.
I also felt like they were kind of focusing more on Ron, but they didn't have enough to go on because, like I said, it was rushed. Right. It's like if you're not, and that's what, you guys, what I'm seeing is you're listening to all these tapes, you're putting everything together, which I appreciate. It's thoughtful, but this is like a 45 layer bean dip, right? of shit. And
it's layered before you even get my dad involved. But once you get my dad involved, the list of people that may have wanted to hurt my dad or his reputation is long and distinguished.
Yeah, you start throwing Tommy Robinson and all of that crazy in there.
Bob Trout.
The thing I found,
political enemies, God knows.
The thing I found amusing about the Snapped episode was Tommy Robinson just gets reduced down to the sheriff. And there's nothing.
I didn't hate that. I thought that was pretty funny.
I wish they'd use I wish they'd use like a stock, just a stock photo of what was his name?
Roscoe P. Coltrane or something like that.
So I just thought amusing that one of the big major players in this whole thing is just reduced down to a stock blank slate sheriff, and not Tommy Robinson. Which I mean, that which Tommy Robinson just as a character should be catnip. Like that's you want
that's he is a thing in his own right. Like, he is something. And I
guess kind of wrap this up a little bit. So when I interviewed Jack Lasseter, I asked him, 44 years later, what are the lessons that you think can be learned from this whole saga that took place? And he says, like, the justice system's delicate. And if you get, if you get another sheriff that's like Tommy Robinson, all this could happen again.
No, you have to, absolute power corrupt, it's like he could do whatever he wanted. Right. And so, yeah, you've got to hold the people in charge to high standards. You have to. People who are put in charge have to be held to high standards. If you don't, it gives permission to everybody else to act awful, right? And I'm not going to get too political here. I'm just going to avoid that. But, he had his little pocket of the world where he was a big fish, and he threw that weight around, and he didn't like that my dad had embarrassed him in court. It hurt his little ego, and so that kind of tied into that. And I know I 100% agree with Mr. Lassiter. It's taught me to not be so quick to judge people. If anything, it's made me very methodical. My default setting is to be very judgmental. Okay, to make quick snap decisions, and in my line of work and what I do, I oftentimes need to lean into that. But if given the opportunity, I do try to be fair and to not be so quick to be judgmental, even though that's what my gut is like. Judge. But after seeing what happened to my father, it has tempered me, and it has encouraged me to be a little bit more aware that not everything is what it seems. Be willing to get all the evidence, and that frustrates some people. Some people, especially nowadays, everybody wants the answer like this, and you've got to slow it down, and you've got to make sure you get it right. And I was glad that people were willing to slow things down and not completely run over my dad, any worse than they already did.
Chuck?
I would say similarly, and I've seen it has affected me long term in the way I watch certain stories, or the way I'll handle someone flippantly throwing really hardcore accusations around. I've got a couple of guys in my fantasy football league. We have a tendency to talk a lot of shit in our chat, but we'll, occasionally it'll get a little political, and I try to stay away from that, but I struggle because I'm kind of feverish about it. And one of the guys in my chat made a comment about how many dead bodies are associated with Hillary Clinton, and I jumped his ass about it. And he was like, "Why would you care? Why would you defend her?" I go, "I tell you what, if that's ever proven to not be true, I want you to drive to New York and I want you to apologize to her face." He goes, "Why would I do that?" And I go, "Because I had to watch people do that to my fucking dad my entire life, and no one ever walked up and apologized to my dad." And when she did her, don't get me wrong, I understand there was a lot of BS in her little come to Jesus interview she did late in her life, but she did exonerate my dad. She did acknowledge that she did this on her own and my dad had nothing to do with it. But sometimes it doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. People are still going to believe what they want to believe. And there are people that have very strongly held beliefs about whether or not my dad was innocent or guilty based off of broken information and how fun it is to have a hot take. But no one ever wants to apologize to the person that they've talked shit about. So it's really my point is that, yeah, when you're talking about politicians, whatever, I guess, swing your hammer. It is what it is. But when you're talking about human beings and you're like, you see some story on the news, you're like, oh yeah, that guy's guilty as shit. Careful. You got to be careful. You're talking about a human being with kids. You're talking about a guy whose life just fell apart. If you don't know that's the case, you need to watch what the hell you say, because if you're wrong, you're going to go and tell everyone your opinion on this, you're going to say, this is what that guy did. Oh, that guy's guilty as hell, blah, 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 blah. Then when you find out that's not the case, are you going to go seek them out and apologize? You're going to go back to all those people you lied to and tell them, yeah, I know I've talked about what a murdering piece of garbage Bill McArthur was, but I shouldn't have done that because it turns out I was wrong. No one does that. So
it's funny you bring up Hillary. My dad, he had lots of big opinions on politicians, and his opinions of Bill Clinton, Frank White, he had big opinions, on all of them. But he never wavered in his respect for her, which I thought was interesting. Because while my dad, one minute could be the most, feminist, women's rights, he could turn and he could say the most offensive things. He could. He was a complicated dude, and he and I would have constant, like, are you kidding me? Or did that come out of your mouth kind of thing? But he and I were talking one time, and he said, a lot of people turned on me when all this happened. And I can't remember what came up. There was something happened, on the TV about Hillary. And he goes, he always said that she was the smarter of the two Clintons. And he said, and he liked her because her office is kind of catty corner from his. Like hers was a little further down the way.
Wait, what?
And yeah, like she was at the Rose Law Firm. And so his office was here. Hers was like, boop, like just down the street. Yeah.
Okay.
And so they knew each other. Like I said, Arkansas is tiny and everybody knows everybody.
Yeah.
And but anyways, so when all this was going on, and I think my dad was sitting somewhere by himself and nobody was talking to him. Like I said, he was a bit of a pariah there when all this was going on. He really, like, he had gone from being like the golden boy to poo-poo, just overnight. And she made a point, I think she had noticed it, and it made a point to walk over in front of everybody and show him support. And that small act to him, he would have gone into battle for her for that. Like, it meant so much to him that she had done that. And I don't even know if she realized it or if she knows that that's how he perceived it,
Mm-hmm.
But it was something monumental for him, that somebody that he respected when he was at his lowest was willing to come up.
82, 83, that's when this happened?
It had to have been, yeah. He didn't get into the dates or anything, but it was, he goes, and it was not politically advantageous for her to do that either. He goes, her husband is a much more political animal in that regard. Like, he would not have done it. He said, but she did. And I was like,
Now, at lunch or something? Or?
Yeah, he was out eating somewhere, I don't know where. He didn't specify, but he said it's I don't think it was because where was it? He may have told me, but I remember my memory on it makes me think it was somewhere more well lit than that. But yeah, I remember that was something that did stick with him. He respected that a great deal.
Okay. So. I forgot to mention, so 2003, Mary Lee confesses and all that, exonerate your dad. How did you two find out?
I think my dad warned me that it was coming. I think somebody had tipped him off, and then he tipped me off, and then I read the account in the paper. He did call and let me know, but I was living in Savannah at that time.
Okay.
In 2003. Yeah. So
my wife, who always seems to have the inside track, she called me and told me to run and get a paper. So go back and get a paper. I said, why? She goes,
yeah, I think my dad had warned me.
Mary Lee Orsini. Mary Lee Orsini did an interview, and from what I understand, it's essentially a jailhouse confession. I was like, oh shit! So I went and got it, read it, and I was excited about it. This is, and Rob, me and you have talked about this, but I talked to my understanding of the facts before. I've learned a lot about all of this in this last couple of weeks. There's a lot of things I carried around for a while that I was either told or things I assumed that turned out to be not correct. But when I read that, I guess I've been a son and I am currently a father. And I guess if someone was still telling the story that I had cheated on my wife when I hadn't, I'd still be pissed off about it. Mm-hmm. But in my mind, he had been carrying this giant cross for years, and it was finally taken off his back. So I knew he used to go to lunch at the MC Suites, their little sports bar in the MC Suites. That was his lunch spot after the bandbox moved. So I knew he was going to be there. So as soon as I read it, I went by there to talk to him about it, and I was expecting him to be all excited. I was expecting him to be happy that he's finally exonerated. So I go in there excited for him. I'm happy for him. And he is mad as a hornet. And I'm like, what are you so pissed off about? He goes, I can't believe that lying bitch says we had an affair. I'm just looking at him going, married people have affairs all the time. I mean, I'm not saying it's wrong or right, but who gives a shit? You spent 18 months of your life trying to prove you weren't a murderer. Half the state thinks you're a murderer. You were just exonerated in the state newspaper. You should be excited. He goes, yeah, but she's still lying. And I was like, it kind of blew my mind.
Yeah, no.
It blew my mind. I'm like, that's like,
Well,
I think to him, he didn't want, he's like, no, because in her current narrative, yeah, I may not have had anything to do with it, but I was still responsible for the situation that existed.
yeah.
And to be completely honest, that was kind of the way I thought it was anyway. Because when dad developed his, later in life, I'm sure you're aware, he developed a little bit of a drinking problem.
No, we talked about it last week.
Yeah. And I think different people drink for different reasons. I think my dad drank because he had demons in his head. I think he just got to the point where if he was sober, he just was like overwhelmed with like guilt, shame, anger, whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever but I think he drank to quiet all of the background noise that was always in his head. And to me, in my mind, I was like, well, great. Now we're going to take this cross off your back. And to him, he's like, no, because if people still believe that the affair happened, then they still believe that I created the situation that led to this.
Mm-hmm.
And now
I can see that.
I understand that better. When I was younger, I was like, I don't give a shit if you cheat. I mean, don't get me wrong. If it had ended in a divorce, I'd be mad at you. You cheated on mom. Now y'all are divorced. I'm mad at you. But when the scale is so much more grandiose. We're talking about one of the most famous murders in the state, and you just got exonerated. Why aren't you happy? And to him, it wasn't about that. It was about she's still sticking to her story that I had something to do with this, whether I had something to do with this or not. And and he was still pissed about it.
I did have a conversation. I would agree with that. He was not happy about it. Like he was like, but and I get it, because I was like, what the, like, but my thought on it is I just feel like at the end of the day, she was a narcissist. She was probably a psychopath, you know. Sh Playing games is what she liked to do, you know. And I I think at that point I was out of fucks to give about her, and in my opinion, it was like, oh, good, let's just hurt my dad some more. Thanks for that, and I didn't want to
necessarily think that's it. I think she's one of those people that she believed that she could be the next Mrs. McArthur if she could just get my mom out of the way.
Well, I think she thought of it.
Yeah.
I don't know if she was delusional.
I guess what I'm saying is that she had this fantasy in her head, and if the last thing she does before she dies is do this interview where, yes, she exonerates my dad, which people are going to be happy about. So she's going to get a positive response from saying this, but she also gets to still act as though there were feelings between the two, which is horseshit.
Yeah.
But she stuck to that narrative because that's what she wanted. In her, the reality she was trying to create for herself, it was important enough to her to still hold on to that. Like I said, I don't know. The only people who know are those two and God. But knowing how my dad reacted to that, and like I said, I spent a lot of my time thinking that it could have happened. I mean, my dad was a vain man. She was a pretty lady, I mean, who knows? Who knows if it could have happened? I was probably wrong to think that. I was much more worried about the larger implications. I was much more worried about my father not being considered a murderer anymore. I didn't really give a shit about if there was an affair or not. But I do understand why it still pissed him off, because it didn't really fix the amount of guilt that he had been carrying around.
Yeah, I think it just tore a scab off for him.
Yeah. I agree.
Okay. So I did want to ask you, so I guess this might be my last question. So there's going to be people out there who were maybe young when they lost their parents or a parent through a violent crime.
Mhm.
I'm just wondering what's something you would want to say to people who've gone through something similar like you guys? Like, what's
Oh
advice
gosh.
you'd want to give?
God. Don't want that information from me. Um, I don't know. Find your tribe. Find people that you trust. Um, it may be your family, it may not be. But don't let it be who you are. You know, it will always be in there. Like it's funny. Like grief is a weird thing. It's almost cellular. Because it's funny. Like there are times where like I will be in the worst damn mood, and I'm like, God, I just want to fight. Like and I'm just ready to go, and then I'll realize, oh, it's that day. You know, and it's like my body knows, and I haven't put it together. Then I might put it together at 7 o'clock at night. I'm like, oh well, there we go. That's what it is. Then I have to go apologize to everybody for being a bear all day. But it's allow yourself to grieve. Like I said, I pretty much disassociated, so I don't know if that's always the best thing to do. I think I did more of my healing as I got older, a little bit more mature. It is what protected me, and that's what I had to do at the time. You know, um, and it served me well. Would it serve everybody? I don't know. I think everybody's kind of wired a little different. Um, I don't know. Just find people that you love and just hold on to them. You know.
Good.
I agree. I would say identify and eliminate the two-faced people in your life. Find the people that are going to do the right thing for you and with you. It's important. Those kinds of situations you can find yourself surrounded by uh, a lot of sycophancy, a lot of people that just want to be close to the drama. It's important to be able to identify the people that are your ride or dies and not get um, you know don't allow all the sycophancy that comes along with the attention to um, cloud your vision of who your people really are. Another is find a healthy and appropriate. I'm not going to say appropriate because it's going to be different for everyone. Find a healthy way to grieve. Don't carry that shit too long. It's like Robyn said, it's always going to be there. It's always going to be part of you. You're never going to get away from it completely, but there is a part of grief that is so pointed and so heavy that if you let it go too long without dealing with it, you'll get to a point where you can't control how it happens, and that can be really, really unhealthy. Um, and really, that's it. And just understand, understand that everyone's normal is their normal.
Mhm.
There are people that grow up dirt poor. They're the happiest people in the world, and there are people that grow up very, very wealthy and have god awful stuff happen in their lives. So it's very hard to know what's going on in someone else's life and all of that. So just when I think about the way I grew up, a lot of people are like, "Oh my God, that must have been so hard." It wasn't. It wasn't. It was my normal. I don't know how you grew up, Daniel. I don't have any idea what your normal looked like. I know what my normal looked like. I can empathize with what my sister's normal looked like, but our normal was different. She was a listener. She was she was camouflage. I was the court jester. I deal with high stress situations by being a goofball. That's how I, that's So I would say that don't allow what you're going through to affect the trajectory of your life in a negative way, because it doesn't, you're not damned to an altered life just because you had an altered childhood,
Hmm.
I guess is what I would say.
Okay. Now, okay, this will be my last question for you guys, before I stop the recording anyway. Um, what's one thing you want people who listen to this podcast or read the stories in the paper? What's the one thing you guys want them to know about your mom and your dad? What's the one thing you want them to take away about who they were?
You going first?
No, I'm thinking you go first.
The one, I mean,
You like to talk more than me anyway.
the one thing I would want them to know about I mean, there's the surface level stuff that people that met them would know, but only the people that really knew them and loved them knew. Like, I want you to know that my mom could be fun, she could be crass, she could be loving, she could be artistic. She was a well-rounded woman, and all of the books and all of the things, all of the pieces of media that have been about this, she's always been cast as in the victim's role, and there's so little depth to that role. It's always been important attorney, pretty wife, murder. That's about as deep as it gets. She was a lot more than that. And my dad was more than just a successful attorney who happened to have this horrible, twist of fate affect his entire life. He was a how we talked about how hard my mom worked so that her Southern Louisiana heritage didn't ooze out of her all the time.
Mm.
My dad was pretty much the same way. He was a redneck from Clinton, Arkansas, but he was very articulate. He chose, how people joke about $5 words. My dad was the king of $5 words, but they didn't sound fake with him. He could speak in, you know, polysyllabic words that would make people go, huh? But it didn't sound like he was showing off. It just sounded like he had a gigantic melon full of vocabulary. Um, but he was also, I mean, like the one thing I'll say about my father is that he did a little bit of everything, but he also appreciated other people doing it better. I mean, yeah, my dad did rodeo when he was young, but he's never a rodeo champion. He played basketball, but he was no basketball player. He played baseball, but he was no baseball player. But when he found what he was good at, he was really, really, really good at it. But, you know, he always said that I was a better baseball player than he was, and he loved the fact that I was good at baseball. He got off on it. Me and Robyn are both artistic, but I think she leaned into it a little more, and he loved her art. He loved the fact that he couldn't draw a good circle, but Robyn could. He was proud of the way she would draw, and the way she would paint. So it was, a lot of times when you got someone that has the kind of ego that my father had, they get a little consumed with it, and they're always thinking about how they measure up. He was not that way, or at least not with the people that he cared about. He didn't care if, I think I told you this, he's wildly successful, made a good amount of money, but he bought one Cadillac, drove it for a couple of years and got rid of it, and was a Buick man after that because it was too showy for him. It just wasn't his bag. And people that didn't know him, they go, "Oh, a successful attorney who owns two nightclubs. I bet that guy was a lot. I bet that guy was like Captain Cadillac." No, he wasn't. He was actually a down-to-earth Clinton redneck who just happened to be really smart. So there, that's what I want people to know about my parents.
All right.
I would agree. My dad could be pretty self-deprecating too, which I always thought was pretty funny. He would make fun of himself. I don't know if he did that in front of everybody, but he was fun to tease. And he genuinely cared about people, and I don't think a lot of people know that. Like I've mentioned he was a soft touch. He's a soft-hearted man. I think he got hardened by some of this, but I don't think I think he still would give people the shirt off his back, if they needed it. But I just loved how smart he was. I loved how kind he could be. He loved animals, he would bitch and moan about them, but then he'd sleep with them, and he'd love on them and stuff, yeah. And, he would get mad at me for bringing animals home, and then they'd be his best friend and become his dog, or cat or whatever, raccoon or whatever we brought in the house, it's,
He didn't like my snake.
He did not like the snake. No. Furry things, he liked the furry things. I don't know. He and my mom were both really good at kind of having a public persona and then a real person behind it, and Chuck and I were lucky enough to know those real people. And, we've said quite a bit about my mom, she liked her tennis. She liked to, be kind of brassy and, but she also really valued education. She loved engaging with people who could go toe to toe with her. That was her jam. She met one of her best friends. So she was palling around with her friends, and my mom wanted to go do something with them. And they're like, well, we're actually going to our friend's graduation. They're getting their master's or something like that. And she goes, oh, where? And I think it was at Euler. And they're like, yeah, she's getting her master's. And she goes, well, how old is she? And I think she was in her 40s at that point. And my mom just thought that was the coolest thing, and went out there and went to this woman's graduation that she didn't even know. And they ended up becoming like best friends,
Wow.
And because she admired that so much, that, you never stop learning, you just keep doing that. And she herself was a soft touch too, she,
I don't know about that.
oh, 100%. I've got her diary.
I know she was a soft touch, but she was also...
She put things out there, but then she would talk about them to herself later. And so I got to kind of see, what she regretted, what she loved, what she had hoped, and she was a dreamer, she loved being creative. I don't want her just to be stamped as just this, tennis playing housewife. She was so much more.